This prophet just prophesied the end of the world, the eroding of public discourse with the introduction of television. We are constantly bombarded with the news of the last 5 minutes. We have an atom bomb in our pockets. Reformed Protestant Baptist worship is a threat to the age of the cloud. We are far too good at analyzing what is wrong with the culture and far too myopic at analyzing what is wrong in the church. What is a leading factor in what we perceive today as the destabilization of civilization? Many would pick this ideology or that ideology, but this prophet, he says that while many criticisms of certain ideologies are completely valid and may contribute to the destabilization of society, there is one factor that is far too often overlooked. In, I believe it was 1985, Neil Postman wrote a book, it's right here, called Entertaining Ourselves to Death. I think that there were things that Neil Postman was thinking about after the dawn of the age of television that would be really helpful for us to consider today. Capitalism, Marxism, socialism. Many people want to pick a camp and defend their camp against that other camp. Neil Postman didn't think that that was his job. He wanted to identify another problem, especially in the West and in America. And that was the eroding of public discourse with the introduction of television. This new technology introduced something into the social imagination of the people of the West that had never been before thought of, and that is the news of today. Postman was very concerned. What about the medium by which these ideologies and these messages are communicated? What are the disadvantages of having that ability to communicate in such a way? Commercialized radio, commercialized news, which is driven by advertisers. Public discourse is threatened because now news is transforming into the show business.
But I know that today's work culture no longer caters to the job loyalty that could be promised to earlier generations.
Good people, such as yourself, who reached the top of the mountain, didn't just fall there. My motto is, if you want to win the lottery, you have to make the money to buy a ticket. You have to make the money to buy a ticket.
You have to make the money to buy a ticket!
In chapter 1 of Amusing Ourselves to Death, Neil Postman really gives a 30,000 foot view of technological advancements throughout history. Certain small groups of people used to communicate with one another through smoke signals. They were limited to the form of communication of smoke signals. You light the fire, and then that alerts this other small group of people that they're in need of assistance. So let's say that people group A have run out of some bush beer, and they're limited to the technology of smoke signals. So they light the fire and they say, hey, people group B, can you help us out? Another technological advancement was the introduction of the clock. Up to this point, before the clock, humanity's relationship to time, and therefore their relationship to all sorts of metaphysical realities that were beyond them, and I would say therefore their view of the divine, of God, was a much more natural relationship. they were subject to the seasons, and there was very little that they could do about that. And so there was a psychological impact on how they viewed time and life and nature. But when the clock is introduced, now humanity is psychologically impacted, or their social imagination is impacted in such a way that they begin to view time mathematically, more scientifically, down to minutes and seconds. What this does is it slightly, if you will, elevates man just a little bit more in control of nature. Instead of being subject to God and His providence and the way that He's ordered the world, we have a little bit more control now. We can mathematically navigate time down to the seconds and eventually even milliseconds. Another major technological advancement that he mentions is the telegraph. Now I am able to communicate more complex ideas in much more detail through words and more complicated ways of communication. This too affects how we relate to the world around us. That also comes with a massive inflation of the ego, how man sees himself in relation to nature. And it comes with an unfortunate sense of responsibility increasingly as technology continues to advance, that every individual starts to feel. And that is that they are responsible to know about as much as they are able. So as technology advances, they are responsible to understand this information and have, as history goes on, an interpretation of that information more and more and more. And at no point, as this technology advances, are we stepping back and asking ourselves, yes, we can, but should we? Now, when Neil Postman wrote this book, he was primarily concerned with TV, because at this point in the history of technology, we now have the ability to know not what happened a couple of days ago. Oh, there was a murder down the street and now it's in the newspaper and I'm learning about it. We are promised to know about the news of today. At one point he says something about people began, as show business developed, to pay less attention to their scripts and more attention to their hair dryers, because this is now entertainment. Maybe you'll begin to start to see why he said we are entertaining ourselves to death. Neil Postman is not saying you are just a bunch of couch potatoes watching your favorite television show and we're just going to rot away. What he's saying is relevant at an even larger and social scale. What he is saying is that when the message that we are trying to communicate turns into show business, public discourse will begin to erode, and our ability to reason and rationalize amongst ourselves will be threatened, and therefore society and civilization will become more and more destabilized. Listen to this this quote from Postman. To say it then as plainly as I can, this book is an inquiry into and a lamentation about the most significant American cultural fact of the second half of the 20th century: the decline of the age of typography and the ascendancy of the age of television. This changeover has dramatically and irreversibly shifted the content and the meaning of public discourse. Since two media so vastly different cannot accommodate the same ideas, as the influence of print wanes, the content of politics, religion, education, and anything else that comprises public business must change and be recast in terms that are most suitable to television. What would he say about the cloud and the global connectivity we are all experiencing through cloud-based technologies? We are constantly being bombarded with the news of the last 5 minutes. This is why I am saying that Neil Postman was very prophetic, because he was lamenting a technology that had been developing within his lifetime. If the news of the day was threatening stability culturally and societally, how much more is the news of the last 5 minutes threatening cultural stability? I mean, do we not feel that right now? Anytime there's an issue, within 5 minutes, think of the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Within 5 minutes, the lines had been drawn in the sand. And I felt a tremendous pressure to state what I felt about this. And that week of the overturning, if your pastor didn't celebrate it, people left churches over that. If your pastor didn't speak out against Black Lives Matter in 2020, we're being bombarded with these riots and these things are going on, and COVID and all these things are happening. And if your pastor doesn't state his opinion, or if he does and it doesn't agree with yours, you're going to leave that church. This is a tremendous pressure all of our communities are experiencing right now. Godly societies, churches, Christian communities, small communities, just local communities involved with school and other religious things like that, theaters, colleges, you name it, just your average workplace. Lines are constantly being drawn in the sand. And because of how these searching systems and algorithms work, the divide between right and left continues to increase to where more and more there are no enemies to my right if I'm on the right, and there are no enemies to my left if I'm on the left. This was prophetic, his concern. Yet again, we're just seeing, when we were able to understand time in terms of minutes and seconds and not just seasons, that was a massive thing. But now this is light years beyond that. Now, the news of 15 minutes ago has a little bearing on our lives. We're glued to our phones, waiting for the next dopamine hit, waiting to find out if there were any survivors in that submersible. The information, the content, or if you will, the stuff that makes up what is called the news of the day did not exist, could not exist in a world that lacked the media to give it expression. I do not mean that things like fires, wars, murders, and love affairs did not ever and always happen in places all over the world. I mean that lacking a technology to advertise them, people could not attend to them, could not include them in their daily business. Such information could not exist as part of the content of culture. Neil Postman goes on to say that this new technology, it shapes our worldview, and that's kind of what I've been saying. It shapes the way that we see the world. It is like, I've said this before, it is like having the ring of power in your pocket.
If you ask it of me, I will give you the One Ring. You offer it to me freely. I do not deny that my heart has greatly desired this. In place of a dark lord, you would have a queen! Not dark, but beautiful and terrible as the dawn! Treacherous as the sea! Stronger than the foundations of the earth! All shall love me and despair! I passed the test. I cannot do this alone. You are a ring bearer, Frodo. To bear a ring of power is to be alone.
We live under this impression that when news develops, I can potentially post something online that massively influences people through the internet. That is a massive amount of power. When we've learned how to split an atom, national authorities decided that would not be a very good technology to put in the pockets of every American citizen. What I'm saying, and you probably won't agree with this is at least as big of a technological advancement. The ability to communicate ideas in seconds. That's at least as big of a technological advancement as when we learned how to split the atom. This technology has introduced us into a culture war that we have just found ourselves in, and now we fight with our tongues and we kill with our speech more and more. If you don't mind me saying, we have an atom bomb in our pockets, and every issue therefore ends up being like a bomb is going off. How does this impact the way that we view ourselves in relation to God? This is such an unprecedented way of relating to space, time, and ideas, that nature, space, time, and ideas are bendable to our wills, that we are immortal. We certainly believe that our ideas continue to be immortalized every time we post online. Many people would say ideas have consequences. Capitalism has consequences. Marxism, socialism, Freudianism, they have consequences. If you believe those ideas, there will be consequences for society. What I think that Postman is saying is that yes, ideas have consequences, and the medium by which those ideas are communicated have consequences as well. Neil Postman, very shockingly, actually goes to the second commandment that God gave to the people of Israel. I don't even know if Neil Postman was a Christian, to talk about the impact of the way that we relate to symbols and speech and modes of communication. The second commandment shaped the Jews' worldview. It shaped how they were to think about God and the world around them. And it really informed them and the world around them that God had set apart these people to be a holy nation set apart for the worship of God. And that therefore they are limited in their worship of God to only worship Him and how He has specifically commanded in His special revelation. The same principle applies to Christians today. Christians are a holy nation. The Church of Jesus Christ has been set apart and made holy for the express purpose and mission of the worship of God. So we too must apply the principle of worship and attend to only what God has revealed in His Word in matters dealing with worship. If the Jews, marked by the blood on the door in the Exodus narrative, had been set apart by God as a group of worshipers, how much more Christians who have been marked by the blood of Jesus Christ, who died for sinners and has been raised from the dead for sinners and their justification, how much more should they attend to what God has specially revealed, how Jesus should be worshipped? This principle that Postman is getting at really is the Reformed and especially Baptist principle of worship. God regulates how we should worship Him, and that shapes us. Speech, communication, and the mode of communication shapes us. The world that we live in shapes us. And Reformed, Protestant, Baptist worship is a threat to the age of the cloud. The age of the cloud threatens to shape the way people think about how they relate to God and how they relate to His world. But Reformed worship is a threat against that. And specifically Baptist worship threatens the age of the cloud because it fortifies Christians against the temptations to be moved by the medium of the cloud, to pay too much attention to problems in culture instead of the need for saving grace. We start to become so influenced by our technologies, and right now it is happening, so that we are drifting further and further away from the need for saving grace because we're so captivated by the messages that are being sent to us by the medium of these cloud-based technologies. And so we get distracted by these messages, and these messages continue to be more and more us versus them, and more about how to engage in a culture war rather than focused on faith in Jesus, serving Jesus, loving Jesus, repenting to Jesus, asking for his forgiveness, growing in obedience more, and growing and being shaped as a worshiper. Listen to Sinclair Ferguson put it this way: we are far too good at analyzing what is wrong with the culture and far too myopic at analyzing what is wrong in the church. Stay Baptist, my friends. This is so silly. Hey. Let's talk about the end of the world. Hello. All right. I'm so ready. I don't know if I can do this with a straight face. I don't know if I'll be able to do this with a straight face. This is like inappropriate. All right. This dude just prophesied the end of the world.